Hey guys, Brian with RenderMan for Blender here. I'm making a video today to show off some of the new features we have coming in the next version of RenderMan for Blender, and also sort of be a little tutorial for users who are new to the renderer inside of Blender and possibly want to learn some of the new features. So let's get right into it. Basically, this new version that we have coming out is going to be a workflow type release. And what I mean by that is that we worked on improving the workflows to make them more intuitive, easy to use, but then also be able to be configurable for the more power users. And so you'll see a lot of places the interface will be very simple, and then you can expand it and make it more advanced for other users. So first thing we have is configuring RenderMan for Blender inside of Blender. And previously what you would have to do is install RenderMan Pro Server on your computer and also install the add-on inside of Blender. And that hasn't changed. The only thing we've really changed is the configuration of the add-on to tell it where to find Blender. A lot of people were having issues before of not being able to find RenderMan Pro Server, so we made that simpler and more automatic. So basically, if you go into the user preferences here, you will see, if I go down to where the RenderMan preferences are. So we have made the settings here a little simpler, and by default the RenderMan location will just choose the newest version that it finds installed on your machine. Now this will only work if you install RenderMan Pro Server to the normal location. By normal I mean C:, program files, Pixar on Windows, or applications Pixar on OS X. Basically wherever the RenderMan Pro Server installer wants to install RenderMan. If it is located there, then the plugin will find it automatically. And basically what it's going to do is going to go through all the different versions you have installed there and choose the newest one to install. And that's the default behavior. You can go in here and choose a specific version. For example, 20.9 is what the one I want to use. And if you wanted to be more specific or set it up so it uses the RMentry environment variable, if you understand what environment variables are and how to set them up, you can set that here. And in this case, it sees my RMentry is set to RenderMan Pro Server 20.9. And the other option you have is you can just set the, you can set manually the location where you have RenderMan installed. So you have three different options there for how to set your RenderMan installation location. Most people are just going to leave it to the default, which is just going to choose the newest, and I'm going to leave mine to 20.9 here because I have a bunch of different versions installed. So yeah, again, like I said, we're really trying to streamline the interface here. You'll see some nice new icons, and as before, or if you're new to RenderMan for Blender, you have two options basically. One is rendering to the Blender image editor, like all normal renderers do inside of Blender. If you're using cycles, you're probably rendering to the image editor. But RenderMan comes with our own frame buffer, which is called it. And it is pretty cool, nifty little tool for flipping through your different renders. So now basically your only option here is to choose between rendering straight to it, our frame buffer, or if you want to render to the Blender image editor. Now if you do render to the Blender image editor, you have a couple different options here, and these might be hidden away for the final release. Most people aren't going to want to change them, but basically they're just going to tell the add-on how quickly to put the images back into the image editor and basically where to put them. But again, most likely you don't want to change those. So I like using our frame buffer, so I'm going to leave my renderer to go to it. And then, well, first of all, we have the denoise tool. If you're not familiar with Pixar's denoise tool, it's a really cool tool. It lets you render with really low samples and then run a post process which cleans up the image. So a lot of times with path tracers, Cycles, Arnold, and RenderMan as well, if you use very low samples, it renders fast, but the image is very noisy. So the denoiser sort of cleans up that image as a post process without losing the details that are in the image. So you can choose that right here. The other kind of cool little thing is this only render selected option. So here I have a scene which is a cube and the Suzanne head, which should be familiar to all Blender users. And there's a simple area light here, and that is a green area light. And there's also a hemi light in the scene, which is you can see the background. That's the hemi light there. But anyways, if I wanted to go and only render selected, I would go and click that here, and what that will let me do is just render the Suzanne head. It will show the reflections and the shadows from the other objects, but it will the only main object in the scene will be the Suzanne head. So that's kind of cool if you just want to like solo an object and see just what the render of that looks like. And again, you can see the background here. Okay, so that's kind of cool. The other interesting new rendering option we have is this external rendering, and by default it's off, but there's a button here that says enable external rendering, and what that is this will let you render with PRMan outside of the Blender system. So if you go and turn this on and hit render with F12 or like you normally would inside of Blender, it's not going to render through the external render system. You have to use the button here, or we'll see another button in a little bit. But anyway, so this external rendering is, I'll make this a little bigger here, it's totally rendering outside of Blender. So we'll launch a PRMan process outside of Blender, and we'll give you a couple other little options for doing rendering. It's really nice if you're doing like a big batch render, like rendering a big long animation. When you turn that on, you get this external render button. You also get an external render button right up here at the top with your other render button. And the options are pretty much the same as the regular render. You can do denoising. You can do cross-frame denoising. The difference between that and regular denoising is, imagine you have a scene with a lot of motion in it. The denoising takes into effect all of the motion between the different frames and gives you a better denoising output. You can render to it or to OpenEXR TIFF file. It'll let you render external animation. And the main sort of control here is you get to choose how you want to do your render. So for example, the default is to do a local render, and what that does is just launches PRMan right away and goes and renders your frames. Or you can tell it to just generate your rib files. You might do that if you were going to generate your rib files inside of Blender and then render outside of Blender with some other tool or on the command line. Or you can spool your job to either the local queue, which comes with RenderMan Studio, and in version 21 RenderMan, local queue will be with RenderMan Pro Server. But local queue is a tool for managing your batch renders, and as well as Pixar's Tractor tool, which is a distributed rendering system It lets you manage renders over a farm. So anyways, using external render is a way that you can launch those renders, take them to local queue attractor outside of Blender and do them and manage them from there. So here I'm going to just do a render to local queue, an external render to local queue. What we'll see is the job comes up in here, and we can track this, and if I wanted to go and stop my job here in local queue, I can do this here. I can restart a job. I can delete the job. Anyways, using local queue is sort of outside the scope of this, but this is how you would spool the render to local queue. So I'm going to turn that off for now. But that's a cool new tool for managing external renders. Okay, so next thing, like I said, we're sort of streamlining the controls as much as possible. The min samples and max samples should be very similar to people who've used cycles before, and anyone who's used RenderMan from version 19 on. These are all still here. The new thing here is we have these presets. So, if you're working and you want to do a draft render, you can use the preview preset. There are presets that set the denoising on. There are presets that set final. For a final render, you'll notice the max samples are much higher here, so 124 now, versus the preview preset we get 24 samples. So these are just sampling presets, and you can go and make your own presets as well here. So we could go and add a new preset if you decide that you want to make your intermediate quality preset with 64 max samples. You can do that there. The other difference here is you can turn off incremental rendering. Before it was always on, but with incremental rendering off, if I go and do a render now, it's only going to do one bucket at a time versus continually updating the buckets. So here you'll see that as each bucket gets done, it gets written to the frame buffer, whereas before it was iterating over all the buckets. Okay, so the next kind of cool thing we have going on is the RenderMan toolbar. Wazoo, who was one of the contributors to the add-on, was really helpful in doing this. So what we have now is if you hit T in your View 3D here, you, along with all the other toolbars over here, you get this RenderMan toolbar, which gives you a lot of easy-to-use buttons for doing certain tasks. You have a render button. You can start an IPR render. You can add a camera, add an environment light, etc., etc. The other nice thing is it's context sensitive. So you'll notice if I have a light selected here, but if I go and select the Suzanne head, I have a couple different different buttons of things I can do with the object. Here I can change the material. I can make it an emissive material, so if I want to make it into a material that shines a light, I can make it into a subdiv automatically here, and export it as a rib archive, which we'll get to later. The other nice thing is the environment lights. So you can go and select your environment light. If you click the triangle here, you can select your environment light. It'll give you some controls for rotating your environment light around, stuff like that. There's a lot of context sensitive controls here. I'm not going to go into all of them, but go and play around with them. They're pretty cool. So that is the RenderMan toolbar. Now, the next thing I wanted to show you was over in the scene properties. We have some new UIs here. we have a UI for light groups, light linking in the scene properties, and objects groups. So I'm going to actually go ahead and make this one bigger here so we can see it a little better. So light groups and object groups. Basically, the idea here is if you wanted to make a set of lights, label a set of lights. For example, like these are your key lights in your scene. You want to put them all in a group together, and there's various manipulations you can do once you have them in that group. This makes it very easy to do that. And same thing with object groups. If you want to, label a set of object groups as a I don't know, your foreground objects, you can make a set of object groups, and then do various things with them. So I'm going to go through this step by step here, and I'll show you sort of what I mean. So let's say I want to make a set of key lights. I already have my green light here. I'll make that into that will be in my key light group. We're only going to use one light in our key light group, but it's analogous for having multiple lights in there. So you'll notice by default in our light groups we have a light group by default in there called all. That's fairly self-explanatory what that is. But we can go make a new light group here, and we'll call it key light groups. Okay. So we have our light group, but we don't have any actual lights in it. So what we can do is, once we have that light selected, we can just go hit Add Selected to Group, and now you'll see our the list of lights that are in the group always show up here below the light group. So, for example, with all, you see our area light and the hemi light, which is called lamp here. But if I go back to my key group, you can see I have my key group listed here. The other thing that we have in this box here is we have a bunch of different controls, which are going to make it really easy for me to control the light and do some cool things, like if I'm doing my lighting in IPR, which I highly recommend using. We can edit the light really easily here. So especially like if you're doing IPR, let's actually start an IPR render. So when we start an IPR render, we're going to get a really coarse update here, and it's going to update as we go along. Now, if I went and changed my my light color here, it will update automatically in the IPR render. But the reason for having it in a light group is normally you'll be working on a set of lights, for example, your key lights, and you'd be working on them all at once, and this sort of makes that interface for doing that really easily. The other kind of, you'll notice there's a couple other little boxes here. You can turn off a light, so if I wanted to turn that one off, I could do that. And I can also solo a light, which means, okay, I just want to see what this light is doing. It's really helpful when you're relighting, when you're doing your lighting, to be able to turn off one light, or just turn on one light and be able to really quickly see these things. So this is all putting these controls right in one place. Okay, so let's stop the IPR for a second here, and then we're going to go. I'll talk about the object groups, and then we'll go into light linking. So object groups work the same way as the light groups, except you don't get as many. There's not as many fun controls to play with on the object groups. So if I make a new object group called, let's call it my stuff, and then I can go and add in things into my object group there. Now you might be asking, what am I going to use the object group for and the light groups? So we'll get into that here. So one thing that we did was before all the light linking inside of the add-on here was done on the object itself. So you go to the object and you would create a light link to a certain light, and then you could say, for example, let's say I wanted to take I have my red light here and I want to have it shine on everything but my Suzanne head. I would go onto the Suzanne head and then connect it to the light and turn off the light linking. So I would disconnect the light from that object. And that works fine, except for when you're doing this in a large scene with tons of lights and doing it on multiple objects at once. So what we did was we sort of brought together the user interface, and this should look fairly similar to something that's in Maya for some people who've used Maya. But what we have is a light linker which will let us connect lights to objects. It will also let us collect light groups to object groups. So for example, if I wanted to connect my key lights group, all the lights in my key light group to my stuff group, and then turn it off for them, I could do that here. But let's just go back. Let's make this a little more simple. It'll be a little easier to understand. So we're just going to connect lights straight to objects. So I'm going to, again, I want to go and turn off the red light only on the Suzanne head here. So I'm going to select the area light and then also select my Suzanne head, and then we're going to go and create a light link. So what we can do is, once we have the light link on, you can set how you want it to work. So you have a couple different options. The default is, well, default, or you can force it on or force it off. Now, if you, let's go to the light here. Oops. Selecting the light. Now if I go and look at the light, you'll see this illuminates by default button here. That means that by default it illuminates objects in the scene. If I have that on, then the default here is going to leave it on. If this is off, then using the default light link is going to turn it off. So for example, if you wanted to do the opposite, if you wanted to have the red light only shine on the Suzanne head, I would turn this off by default and then turn this on. But what I want to do is I want to have the red light shine on everything in the screen, but then have it not shine on the Suzanne head. So I can do this here, and then we'll go hit render. And what we see is we still get the red light here on the plane, on the cube, everything else there, but not on the Suzanne head. We're getting a little bounce red lighting off there. That's what that is. But again, this is a pretty simple example, but I just wanted to show you how the light linking works. There was another tutorial on YouTube, which I'll put a link to, which talks about light linking, and that was using the old interface, but it goes into more in-depth in light linking. So I'll post a link to that. Okay, so that was light linking and the new scene properties user interface. The other new interface we have is in the render layers. So what we have is sort of a little simplified user interface. You'll see this should look pretty familiar for people who have used Blender's render layers before. When you do the render layers, you have your checkboxes. You can turn on these outputs, and these are all great. One thing that RenderMan is really strong in, though, is generating custom AOVs or outputs. So You can use the standard Blender outputs, and that might be great for most people. If you want some specific outputs though, and use more of the powerful RenderMan outputs, you can hit this button here, and we will get more options. So back before we had just the RGBA and Z outputs on, so when we switch over, you see them listed here, the ones that we had on, and you'll notice that there's a option here for light group and object group. So if I go and click on that here, you see I could put in my key light, and what these will let me do is I could output RGBA just coming from the key light, or I could output just RGBA on my my stuff group here. The other option we have is exporting multi-layer OpenEXRs, which is kind of cool. It will let me, that will combine all of the layers here, all the AOVs here into one EXR file. And we also have the ability to output a, and you have some options for your EXR files. You can also output a deep EXR data file, which is really useful for if you're doing compositing in Nuke. I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure the Blender compositor doesn't support deep EXR yet, but if you're going to Nuke, this is really useful. So again, like I said before, the outputs in Blender are great, but we have a lot of different options here in RenderMan for doing things. So if I want to go add a new output here, I can choose to use, let's output P, or we could output the amount of curvature on the object. All of these are talked about in the RenderMan documentation. These are all the ones that are built into RenderMan. There's also a bunch of like reflection, diffuse, stuff like that. All the ones that you normally have in Blender. You can also write in a custom LPE, and these are strings that sort of define, like for example, if you wanted to say, hey, show me the color which is resulting from 2 diffuse bounces in this scene, you could write in an LP that would describe that here. And again, the syntax for that is in the RenderMan documentation. Anyway, it's really it's a pretty robust system. The other option here is, again, like I said, we're sort of putting all of the advanced options for all the people who actually want to use them. We still have those there, but we're putting them away for the 90% of us out there who don't use these every day. So you can, if you want to go and make one output have more gain to it or more gamma, you do that here. Use different pixel filter, all that sort of stuff. You have the ability to do it in the advanced options for the AOVs. Okay, lastly, actually 2 more things. In a couple different places, both on objects and on the world properties and on the scene properties, you have an option for writing in your own rib box. So this is again more of a advanced option. So here on my object, I could make it, if I could go into my text editor in Blender here, and if I made a new text block, I could write in something like, and this is all rib syntax, so most people probably wouldn't understand this, but if you do know rib syntax, what you can do is make your rib file here, and then set that here, and what it will do is insert this rib into the rib file when rendering. It's an advanced option, something most people won't use, but it's there. Okay, finally, and again, there's rib boxes that you can inject into the scene at the scene level. You can do it at the world level. You can do it at the object. Finally, the new option that's really kind of cool here in the user interface is exporting an object as a rib archive. Now, why would you want to do this? So let's say you have an object that you want to bake out and use it in another scene, or you want to, or you know, it's a really heavy piece of geometry and you don't want to export it every single time you're rendering. We actually, the add-on is very good about, and there's an option for this here. There's this option here called cache rib generation, and what that does is it tries to detect objects that have changed in your scene, and it won't output them if they haven't changed. So that's usually really good. But let's say you want to 100% lock down our Suzanne head here. I can go and export this as a rib archive, and we'll go and put it on our desktop as this rib archive here, and then that archive will be written out as rib, and when we go to render, you'll see that there's a bounding box around it now in the interface. When we go to render it, we will not export that geometry. So if we went and open this here, and oh, actually, all right, I guess we can't do that. But basically, this is a zip file with some rib files in it. So now when we go and render it, it's not going to re-emit this geometry, but it's still going to render the same thing. Or you could, if you open up a new scene file, you could go and import. If you made what you could do is actually make an empty and import this geometry archive there. And all you have to do, the way you do that is you set the geometry source to archive and then point it at your zip file that you had saved off before. So I'll just show that really quickly here. So what you would do is, let's say this was my new scene here with an empty in it. What I would do is go and set the geometry source on that empty to be my zip file with the rib archive in it, and then it would render that there. So now if I go hit render, you'll see I have two Suzanne heads, one where the empty is, and one where the original was, and both of them are being read in from the same location. So that's most of the new features in the user interface that I wanted to show. This should be out in a couple days, but post your comments or questions you might have below, and thanks a lot for taking a look. All right.